Welcome to the retreat, sir. What has been your experience of the retreat thus far?
It was an attempt from the audience to say that it is okay to get philosophical about all this, but you need to look at how we can improve the democratic processes incrementally so that they don't come in the way of development, if they have come in the way of development. Then of course we had the all important session of looking at the Electricity Act and looking at whether it has failed to deliver, whether it will continue to fail to deliver. Then we had a discussion on fuel shortages which are actually bedeviling the power sector. We had discussions on what can be done to improve the coal availability today, and similarly what can be done to improve the gas availability. So far I think the sessions have been extremely business-like, very intense, very active, and the participation in the flow has been amazing.
Certain consumers now feel that just like they had this telecom revolution, where you had a huge amount of competition come in, people are now having 10-15 companies to choose from. Is something like that possible in the power sector, where, for example, the idea that you proposed, separation of carriage and content, can you provide such competition levels to the consumer in the power sector?
One of the precursor to this carriage and content is the whole idea of open access. Open access, what it says is that a consumer should be given choice of the kind of supplier from whom he wants to take power. So the distribution company, as of now what it says is that 1 megawatt or more is the demand of a consumer. That consumer should be allowed by the distribution company to seek to buy power from whichever source he decides upon. So had this happened, it has happened at the level of the interstate transmission. It has not yet happened to that level in intrastate. That is what actually would affect the consumer much more. So we had got the Law Ministry to indicate as to what is the current interpretation of the Act with reference to open access consumers, and the Law Ministry has interpreted the Act and told us that any consumer with 1 megawatt and above as the load is actually an open access consumer from 2009, and he need not apply, he need not be seeking permission for the distribution company. He is free to go ahead and he is an open access consumer. Along with that is the fact that since he is an open access consumer, he would be outside the regulatory framework, and he would have to, with the distribution company, separately work out tariff arrangements. That is what it says. So now this has not really found favor with a large number of distribution companies and states and all that. So there have been different views on this, but the legal position is that the Act is only interpreted by one person, that is the Ministry of Law, and the Ministry of Law clearly has said that this is the way it is. That would have been the first step towards providing consumer a choice. Now the second step is that at the level of the distribution company, you have more than one person who would be willing to supply power, and you would have probably one company which will handle the carriage through which power will flow. It's simply like saying that the road network is owned by somebody, but you have a large number of people who ply buses or taxis or whatever. You can choose anyone that you want as a taxi or a bus, and the road on which it will ply will be controlled by someone else. So this would give consumer a choice. But before we can get into this, there are a lot of things which need to be worked out. Like for instance, the entire gamut of tariff fixation, the present problems of the distribution companies in terms of financial losses, the cross subsidies that are there today. All these things will have to be sorted out somehow. Then we'll have to also create a situation where there is a pool of power that is available, from which a small consumer, 1 megawatt, 10 megawatts, whatever, can choose. We also have to create that generation capacity available so that they can choose from that. and then the whole question of whether this particular network operator, the wires operator or the carriage operator, would he be a single person? Can there be more than one? Should it be a government monopoly? Normally the carrier is seen as a monopoly. So if it is seen as a monopoly, then it will be controlled by the regulator. He will fix all the whatever revenues that will flow to him, he will fix all that. And so the only thing that will be left for a consumer is to choose the supplier of his desire, of his liking, and accordingly fix prices.
Right, sir. Why do we have a separate regulator for the sector? Then what is the role of the Ministry of Power?
The power sector is a large, it cuts across states. It's at the national level, it's also at the state level. So what has been done is earlier the powers to fix tariffs was with the state governments. You had the electricity boards, subsequently the distribution companies, and the state governments used to fix the tariffs. Now what was done was that the person who is the producer should not be fixing the tariffs, and so you had regulators appointed who would independently look at tariff fixation. So the fixation of tariff has to be done by somebody. It should not be the producer who should be doing it. It should be someone who is independent who would be doing it. So if you don't regulate the tariff, then what will happen is that the consumers would then be at the mercy of the distribution company or an electricity board, and they would have no recourse to getting their grievances sorted out. So you have a third player, a person who is not the state government, who is not the electricity board or the distribution company, which is going to fix the tariff. So the regulatory framework is to look at how the distribution companies function and to bring in efficiencies to decide the tariff. The tariff could be just 1 year, it could be 5 years, and so on. All the principles have been stated there. So this is an attempt to take away the powers of fixation of tariff from the state to an independent body. It was all felt that the state would not be interested in increasing tariffs, so there could be political compulsions. So all that has been removed, and this chap has been set up, the regulators. Now you have regulators in all states, then you have a central regulator. The central regulator looks at generating companies which are going to supply power to more than one state. So if there is a generating company in a particular state, the tariff of the generating company, the power flowing from that generating company to the distribution company is decided by the state regulator. But if it is a generating company which is going to supply power to more than one state, then the central regulator will decide the methodologies and principles which will determine the tariff for that particular power station. The central regulator also looks at transmission, the fixation of transmission charges, the development of transmission in the country. The central regulator also has been charged with the responsibility of developing market. But the power, electricity has been a commodity which can be marketed, which can be sold and bought and all that. So exchanges have been set up. So all this has been as a result of the duties cast on the central regulator to develop market. So what you have is a state regulator who will be basically looking at state level generating companies, state discoms, central regulator which will look at interstate generating companies, whole transmission segment, and then market development.
What is the role of the CEA and the Ministry of Power now, given that you have the independent regulation there?
The Ministry of Power makes regulation, makes policies for the entire sector. The Ministry of Power looks at the Act, changes in the Act that are required, policies that are being framed under the Act. Like an Act by itself does not do anything. You have to take further steps to see that the intent of the Act is carried out. So you have policies to be framed, then you have to, you have the administrative task of doing work for the different CPSUs that you have with you. Then the appointment of regulators is sometimes the process that is taken forward, budget provisions for the entire sector and so on. And then what has been done is, earlier the distribution segment, particularly the task of extending electricity network to rural areas was in the domain of the state, in the exclusive domain of the state. The 2003 Act was amended to also make the central government responsible. So it has become a joint responsibility between the two central government and the state governments. So as a result of which, the central government started an ambitious program for rural electrification. So this is a program that the central government has launched. The central government oversees this program, gets the program done, and so on. Right. That is one. And the second important aspect that the central government looks at is, for instance, the whole talk about reducing the aggregate technical and commercial losses. So you again need to have a program which will actually do that. So we had a program maybe 10 years ago which was looking at reducing the AT&C losses. So then the program ran for a while, it was reviewed, and then you came up with certain modifications, and a restructured program has been launched 2009 or so. So this program looks at reducing the AT&C losses, particularly in towns. So Government of India, in the Ministry of Power, handles these big programs, and then policy initiatives like fuel crisis today. You interact with the Ministry of Coal, and you try to see what can be done to improve the availability of fuel, and what can be done to share the fuel equitably among the different power producers. You take up matters connected with, say, gas availability with the concerned ministry, and so on, Ministry of Environment and Forest. So the policy side, the act side, budget provisioning side, all that is with the Ministry of Power. Any national program will be with the Ministry of Power. The Central Electricity Authority is a technical body which will advise the Ministry of Power in terms of planning, coordination, what needs to be done, what should be the standards for different electrical equipment that are used, standards for the systems. So a whole lot of things that they do. They are the topmost technical body of the government in terms of the power sector.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.